I mentioned that Dylan came through Tulsa, but did not visit the center. This was 3 weeks before the center opened. So this would have been April of 2022. And we were scrambling to get the doors open, 3 weeks from that date, which we managed to do, but it was a bit of a crazy, thrilling undertaking. So we were in the midst of so much, but we were ready for Dylan should he have wanted to get a sneak peek. Well, we didn't hear from him while he was here, but we do know that he had to pass by the building because 2 short blocks away is our minor league baseball team's stadium. Go Tulsa Drillers. And Dylan did attend opening night of the Drillers season. We know that he's a fan of minor league baseball.
That was Stephen Jenkins of the Bob Dylan Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hello, and welcome to episode 87 of the Irish Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Becker. Stephen was my guest in episode 85 of the podcast, and he'll be joining me again this week. The Bob Dylan Center is currently running an exhibit on the Pogues, and specifically the band's leader, the late Shane MacGowan. The exhibit runs through May 12th and is titled, They Gave the Walls a Talking. Right now, let's welcome Stephen Jenkins of the Bob Dylan Center. Thanks for being here, Stephen.
Rick, it is my pleasure. Very happy to be here.
A lot of other really popular artists, maybe they aren't Irish by birth, but they have an Irish connection as far as, you talk about, the Beatles. They have Irish roots, but they were all born and raised in England. Dylan, to the best of our knowledge, has no Irish roots, but he still had a connection to the country. He visited often, he played there often, and he really did have an affinity to it. And you can hear in his music, which is a direct line from, I just talked to somebody recently where we talked about the roots of sort of American rock and roll coming from, the black blues experiences, and then some of the, quote unquote, hillbilly music that was heavily influenced by Ireland. So even though Dylan doesn't have that ethnic connection to Ireland, it does feel like he has a connection in the type of music that he made, the type of musicians that he influenced. Like, you can't say, somebody like Bono wasn't heavily influenced by Bob Dylan. So if you could maybe talk a little bit about that, any connection that between him and Ireland, and then some of those other artists beyond just the Pogues who felt that influence.
Sure. Well, absolutely. There was Dylan has an appreciation for Irish music. He talked at length in his early years about the Clancy brothers, for example, who did so much to with great pride, uphold Irish traditional music, and I think did a lot to introduce it to American listeners. So there was a key concert of the Clancy brothers at Carnegie Hall, and that was released as an album in I want to say the mid 60s, that I think helped traditional Irish music find listeners in the U.S. For that matter, Dylan, gave shout outs to Shane MacGowan himself when Dylan would play in Ireland. And fortunately, we have some recordings of this, whether they were official or bootlegged. You can find online Dylan, sang from the stage in Dublin on recent concert appearances. Hey, I just want to say hello to our friend Shane MacGowan out there. The Pogues are important to us. Every Christmas rolls around and we listen to Fairy Tale of New York. And we do know that MacGowan really admired Dylan. In fact, we just had the benefit of having Victoria Mary Clark here in town for the opening of the show. And she talked to us about Shane fondly recalling when Blonde on Blonde, Dylan's 1966 double album, first came out, and Shane went and picked it up along with everyone else who was, tuned in to what was happening in pop music at the time. And from that period on, Victoria tells us, Shane would dutifully pick up every new Dylan album. And she said he really studied those closely. His writing style might have been a little different, but I do think that they share something, which is a real pronounced empathy for other people. You don't get that in every songwriter's work, but Dylan and MacGowan both, show that ability to get inside someone else's shoes and to really not judge them, to simply honor the legitimacy of their lives. MacGowan so famously drawn to sort of folks on the fringes, the misfits, the non-mainstream dreamers and drifters that populate all communities in society and who often produce a lot of the best art. And Shane was very tapped into that crowd, and Dylan too, has an appreciation for those on the margins that you see in some songs. Dylan as well, particularly in the early years, he would, let's say appropriate, maybe another word is steal, melodies from old ballads. So you have something like Chimes of Freedom, one of Dylan's early protest-oriented songs, lyrically extremely complex and with dazzling poetic lines and wordplay and everything that he became known for in the ensuing years, but tied in and anchored by a very lovely lilting melody, which is straight from an Irish folk ballad from 100 years before. And you can hear that original here at the center and then see how that segues into what Dylan did with it. So yes, from the Clancys to the Pogues to the old real traditional stuff, I think Dylan's definitely plugged in to Ireland. I know that when he and Shane MacGowan last saw one another, or in one of their meetings over the last several years when Dylan was in Ireland, they got together at a hotel. They didn't talk about each other's music, but they talked about Sam Peckinpah Westerns. They found common ground in terms of movies they loved and music they liked. And by all accounts, it was just a meeting of two kindred spirits.
So the last time I had the chance to see Bob Dylan in concert, it was a week after Tom Petty passed. And it was very poignant to see him in that time, because you think of all these artists like Shane MacGowan or Tom Petty, where he worked very closely with him. He had a close relationship with them, and they fall off. I mean, he got a Christmas card from John and Yoko. John's been gone for over 40 years now. And Bob Dylan has found a way to keep trucking. He's still out on tour. He's still making new music. He just had a brilliant album come out just a few years ago. And there's something about that I don't know if you can address, because I don't know if there's necessarily a question, but that he has had to continue to push forward while seeing, the rest of not only his generation, but honestly, later generations fall off, people who were influenced by him, and how that just shows his importance and his staying power.
Yeah, I would add Jerry Garcia to that unfortunate list. I mean, Dylan has, among so much else, he's had an unerring sense of who to collaborate with. And he's worked, whether it's Petty and the Heartbreakers, he toured with them in the mid-'80s. Those were amazing shows. The Dead and his years with them. He really, really admired Jerry Garcia. Shane, the others. Sure. I mean, it must be tough to lose your musical friends and brothers and folks you've toured with. On the plus side, if we can take heart in the fact, Dylan has just announced a new series of dates with Willie Nelson. Willie Nelson is, I mean, still going strong, and he's, nearly 10 years older than Dylan is at this point. The relative youngster John Mellencamp is joining them on this round.
Right,
Here's
he's
another,
opening the show because he's the new
yeah,
guy, right?
the new guy, the new upstart. He still has a lot to prove, Mellencamp. And so, those guys are all going out. Dylan I mean, look, he's 82 years old. Clearly, this is not motivated by financial needs. He is, I'm sure, quite comfortable in that regard. It is just a love of what he does. Dylan used to sort of self-effacingly refer to himself as a song and dance man. I think meaning by that, he comes from a long line of in an American tradition of showbiz. And not to make that sound crass, I mean, there's something lovely in that. Is like, you know what? My job is to get on stage and entertain people. And I mean, look, it's much more than that for Bob Dylan or any of these artists whose names we've mentioned. But there's an element of that is, you know what? That's what I agreed to do. He kind of signed a contract, if you will, to uphold that tradition. And he's honored it again and again by still doing, 100 dates a year, and going out there. And people might say, oh, but he's so cryptic and he doesn't say anything from the stage. Yeah, he's not telling long stories between songs, but it's the songs that count. And I mean, he continues to give us so much. And I do think part of it is that he sees himself as, hey, this is my job. If I were a plumber, I'd still get up and I'd go do my plumbing job. I'm a singer, songwriter, and a performer. That's what I'm supposed to do. Again, I think it's a little more multi-layered than that, but there is an element of that I believe keeps him going. He also famously keeps it fresh for himself and for audiences by constantly rearranging songs. So, you might get a minute and a half into hearing the third or fourth song of a set, and you're saying, wait a second, what is this? I know this is one of my favorites. Oh, of course, it's When I Paint My Masterpiece. It's just that it's done to a totally different arrangement, to a totally different melody, and finally you sort of latch onto an unmistakable line of the lyrics, and you realize, wow, he's done it again. He's reimagined a song that he's probably played 4,000 times, and he's keeping it fresh for him and for us. So in so many ways, I think he's a model for other lifers. These other incredible musicians who we're so just blessed to share a lifespan with, who are still doing their thing. Yeah, we've lost a lot of the greats, but there's, as always, there's just so much good music out there, and people, 20-year-olds are continuing to discover Dylan. They're continuing to discover Shane MacGowan. And the fun is seeing what do they do with that, not just slavish imitation, but making something of their own out of it.
Yeah, you were talking about his different arrangements, and I remember there was a joke by the late comedian Norm Macdonald when he saw Bob Dylan and Ringo Starr was in the audience, and he asked Ringo if there was any song that Ringo wanted him to play, and Ringo yelled something up at the stage, and Dylan said, "We already did that one."
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to throw you for one little bit of a loop because I'm going to ask about one other person before I let you go.
Sure
And
thing.
I have been getting really interested in Muhammad Ali's fight at Croke Park and Muhammad Ali's Irish ancestry, that he actually took a lot of pride in it. And Muhammad Ali had some interactions with Bob Dylan, and you could tell that the two of them had an immense respect for each other. And I don't know if you have anything that you can say about the relationship between Dylan and Muhammad Ali, even if it's just as two icons of that era, maybe two people who are so respected by that particular generation and the generations that follow. Because, when you see a picture of the two of them together, it just really says, like, these are two people who they had their jobs, right? They had, one was a fighter, one was a song and dance man, but they both also took other things very, very seriously and used the impact of their art forms to have a social impact.
Sure. I have to plead ignorance in terms of what their interactions might have been, but now you really make me want to research this as soon as our conversation is over. I mean, what a titan, I mean, I think you're right. Ali occupied a place within American culture in that transcended his chosen field, if you will, in the same way that Dylan always has. I mean, the boundaries go so far beyond sport or music when you're talking about these two figures. They were certainly united in a quest for social justice, in working for the civil rights movement. In fact, we have a show planned for a little later this year here at the Dylan Center where we look at Dylan's place within the civil rights movement. Not that he was the center of that, but that he was a key figure. He was there in the March on Washington with the great African American folk singer Len Chandler and Joan Baez and Peter, Paul, and Mary and all the rest. And continued to be very outspoken, particularly in the first few years of his public life, Dylan, in speaking through song for justice and decrying the idiocy of racism and all the rest. Ali, obviously incredibly outspoken, a figurehead in so many ways and someone who so many people looked up to. So I think that's an interesting parallel to draw, and I think there's probably a lot to investigate there that we can get into. I'm not, I don't think I've come across, quotes from Ali saying, "Oh, my favorite album was Highway 61" or anything like that. But now I really want to find out. I can share one anecdote. This is a little off topic, but I think for your listeners, this might be of interest. I mentioned that Dylan came through Tulsa, but did not visit the center. This was 3 weeks before the center opened. So this would have been April of 2022. And we were scrambling to get the doors open, 3 weeks from that date, which we managed to do, but it was a bit of a crazy, thrilling undertaking. So we were in the midst of so much, but we were ready for Dylan should he have wanted to get a sneak peek. Well, we didn't hear from him while he was here, but we do know that he had to pass by the building because 2 short blocks away is our minor league baseball team's stadium. Go Tulsa Drillers. And Dylan did attend opening night of the Drillers season. We know that he's a fan of minor league baseball. He speaking of Willie Nelson, who he's going to tour with later this year, those two did tours strictly of minor league baseball fields in past years. So he's something he really loves. He went to the opening night of the season. He hung a Drillers pennant off of his piano in the concert the next night. Did not say a word about the building that has a huge, 3-story picture of him done in spray paint on the facade of our building, but he did give a shout out to the Drillers. So there you go, Bob Dylan, baseball fan.
Yes, and he has his song Catfish about Catfish Hunter, which is
there you go.
Also another connection to baseball. Stephen Jenkins of the Bob Dylan Center, this has been such a remarkable conversation. I really, really appreciate all your insights into a number of different topics. And if me bringing up Bob Dylan and Muhammad Ali together ends up leading to a picture hanging in that exhibit, my life work will be complete. If you are in Tulsa, make sure that you visit both the Bob Dylan Center and the Woody Guthrie Center. I haven't been there since the Bob Dylan Center opened, but I have been to the Woody Guthrie Center, and it is 100% worth your time. Stephen Jenkins, thank you so much.
Rick, thanks so much. And yes, we got to get you out here, and all your listeners, Come and find us in Tulsa. I think you'll have a great time.
They Gave the Walls a Talking is the name of the exhibit on the Pogues, and it will be showing at the Bob Dylan Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma through May 12th of 2024. I'm Rick Becker, and this has been episode 87 of the Irish Baseball Podcast.